Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our webinar, in which we will talk about leading indicator case studies. And so I'm Jillian, working from Solventure. Been working for Solventure for already quite some years now, mainly expertising in data science and as well as demand planning. I've approached it both from a technical side, where I've worked around leading indicator forecasting, in which we include external factors. It's also been the topic of my PhD, but also from a practical side, in which we've done already many applications at various companies. And during this webinar, we'll show you how to include those leading indicators into your forecasting processes. With me, I have Gustavo Escobar from MIBAG, he will introduce himself.
Perfect. Thank you, Jillian, for the invitation. My name is Gustavo Escobar. I've been working for MIBAG for around 8 years. I'm actually a manager here for the supply chain transformation pillar, having experience pretty much like across Latin America, North America now, and also for a couple of projects also in Europe. But happy to be here, happy to be supporting this initiative, and also to make sure that we're going to be helping you guys on all of the challenges that we're facing nowadays.
Okay, thank you, Gustavo. So what's on the agenda for today? So first we'll do an introduction. Afterwards, we'll talk about leading indicator forecasting, and then we'll dig deeper into 3 different case studies, which will be mainly focused on the automotive industry. So first, let's talk about Solventure. So our mission is based on the book of our CEO, Bram de Smet. It's all about building bridges between corporate strategy, finance, and supply chain. As you can see, we started within the world of supply chain planning software implementation. We've already built 15 years of expertise in that. But over the years, we've also evolved into different parts that support the implementation landscape. We can support you in building your supply chain strategy refinements, into organizing your processes and your organization to support your planning processes. Also on training around the S&OP process, as well as data integration to get the data ready for your tools. So Gustavo, propose that you introduce MIBAG.
Sure, like from the MIBAG side, I mean, if you can see over here in this slide, we have more than 50 years now with experience supporting leading supply chains, global ones, where we provide solutions from an end-to-end perspective, right? So basically, we go through all of the strategic processes, for example, defining your optimal footprint, manufacturing footprint, distribution footprint, but also going into an engineering perspective where we define optimal, for example, intralogistic solutions that will help your operation within the 4 walls to be more efficient. And on the other side, like the third pillar that we usually have here too is the digital side of it, right? That here also we have a couple of like state-of-the-art technologies to support your processes, to make your operation more efficient, but also having like a full perspective from an advanced analytics to even process automation processes, right? As you can see over here, we have like a full global footprint, roughly 26, 27 offices around the world. And we have worked and we have experience with pretty much all of the industries that we can have in the world too, right? So just to make it also shorter, I guess, across all of those pillars that I was mentioning, we also have sustainable solutions across all of the entire supply chain. And the idea is that also, again, we're happy to support you in any of the potential challenges, supply chain challenges that you could be having from an end-to-end perspective. And we have already, like pretty much like 2 days ago, we have launched our new rebranding strategy. So we invite you also to probably follow us on all of the social media platforms that we can reach out to you to get to know each other. All right. So let's start with the real content of the webinar.
Yes, exactly. So if we're talking about forecasting, maybe it's a good idea to first look at how companies are currently forecasting. That's mainly done via traditional techniques. And those are extrapolating historical trends and seasonal patterns. and that tends to work very well during stable times. And a good example of very stable times were the 12 years between the global financial crisis and COVID. However, if there's a demand or a supply shock, those techniques, they will have difficulties into adapting to a new trend. So typically, what do companies do? They rely then on experts to tell them where the business is going. Now, well, where those experts, they typically know their business very well, but it's typical for human interactions to have a lagging effect and an overreacting effect. So that was, to me, that became very clear also during the COVID times. During the initial stages, everybody was still like, okay, let's see where this is going. We're pretty late to react. And then afterwards, there was a huge overreaction on how hard it was going to hit businesses. I've heard companies talk about that they were going to have reduced sales for many, many years. But once they have adjusted to that new reality, the situation already started to normalize. So they were both late to the party and they overreacted to it. But the point is, if your sales history has been polluted, then it's very difficult to apply those traditional statistical techniques to it. And if you look to the past couple of years, it's not just one such event that hit most of the companies, their sales. It has been a combination of a consecutive chain of events, and some of them are listed on the slide here. COVID lockdowns, followed by post-COVID boom and recovery periods. Afterwards, there were shortages because of that recovery and that boom that led to inflation. Afterwards, we also had the war between Russia and Ukraine. We've had an energy and a food crisis. And then more recently, there was increased interest rates by the central banks that increased the cost of capital for companies. And very recently, we've also started to see tensions in the Middle East again, with a potential high impact on oil prices, which might again lead to an inflation wave. And so it's not just one single disruption. For many companies, it has been a consecutive chain of disruptions. So that's making the forecasting, especially if you're only relying on those traditional techniques, very, very challenging. However, if you're talking about embedding external data in the sales process, that's of course not a free lunch. It also comes with challenges, which Gustavo will tell you more about.
Correct. And as Gillian was mentioning, yes, it is not an easy task, right? To take those external factors, having all of the internal nuances that we're having inside of the operations, right? And all of those challenges, I guess, are pretty typical across all of the industries, right? Usually, as Gillian was mentioning, if we don't have the proper forecast process or planning process, we're going to be ending up with high working capital, excess of inventory, that probably we can use that working capital, that cash flow for other purposes in the industry or in the business. Customer expectations, key here and crucial to be identified, right? Because usually probably we focus on the industry and the industry nuances, the industry particularities, right? But we also need to understand our customers, for example, the demographic of what is going to be happening to them in order to have like a better process that will lead into having proper indicators that will let us have like a more accurate forecasting process too. Data and IT infrastructure, also crucial for the evaluation, right? Because if we can have the full data for years and years, but if we don't have the proper connection between what we would like to have, the objectives and the indicators that we would like to make, this is not going to be helping our decision process, right? And we have been facing this with multiple companies that they could be having the data, but they don't know what to do with that data, right? So that's also something that we can support you together with Solventure on identifying those kind of opportunities. But we can have the data, we can have the KPIs, and we can have everything. But we don't have the proper solid infrastructure. For example, a flexible network that it will be resilient enough to adapt to all of those disruptions. Then we're not going to be able to make all of the changes and all of the implementations that we would like to have, right? And most important, and the last but not least, is the communication process and the synchronization that we have inside of our companies too. Usually, what we have been seeing in the past years is that there are like a misconnection inside of the business that usually we don't talk to each other specifically. And we are just working in separate silos and not like cooperatively together to go into a specific consolidated goal, right? So having a solid integrated business planning process will support us to go into those kind of directions that we would like to have, right? So all of those challenges are just to say here on the right-hand side on the things that we need to keep balanced, right? Because we have like three main pieces or three main pillars. Having an understanding of those market requirements and external factors, right? That we can help you also identify those ones. Having the proper information on the product flow captured and the uncertainty related to this one. But on the right-hand side, to have those operational buffers controlled and also having the full visibility on those ones, like inventory, the capacity at our facilities, capacity in terms of like labor too, and the lead time associated to how we're going to be collecting, for example, those materials, right? So also to comment on what Gillian was mentioning, I guess companies have been working in the past pretty much with those traditional kind of like approaches, like relying on lagging indicators that are just purely based on the past information and not looking into forward-looking, for example, indicators that we're going to be discussing in the following slides related to the leading indicators too, right? Because this is going to be providing us a more productive, more prescriptive actually metrics that we will use in order to enhance our forecasting process, in order to have like a better control on what is going to be happening in the future and having like the opportunity to tackle and react quicker depending on the adjustments that we're going to be having in the operation too. All right. But I guess this is just like the triggering point to start talking about the leading indicators, because Gillian in the following slides will be talking about more about this.
Yes, so yeah, we've already talked about traditional statistical techniques, how there have difficulties or challenges in capturing inflection points. If you can identify the good leading indicators that have a good leading value, you're able to capture those inflection points, often months in advance. And if we're looking on the right-hand side, you can kind of see an intuitive graph that shows you what a leading indicator is. So it's an indicator that has a similar behavior as your sales, or in part similar behavior as your sales, but does so with a couple of months of leading value. So if there is a change occurring in an indicator today, that could be some industrial production of a downstream business, that could be some prices of input goods, that could be, for example, oil prices. If that changes today, then X months down the line, it will have an impact on your sales. So why exactly perform leading indicator forecasting? That's really the goal, is to be able to capture those turning points and as sub points. It's very it's to determine what your key business drivers are, and so that you're able to quantify the impact of downstream changes or upstream changes in your value chain that will have an impact on your sales. The goal there, it's not to replace any other forecast processes. No, it's really an additional input next to what you're currently doing. So next to that statistical forecast that extrapolates the historical trend and pattern, next to the sales outlook that captures other information than leading indicator forecasting. It can capture whether you're winning or losing a big client, whether you're winning some project business or some tender business. So it's really an additional input, but it's a key input for your demand planning process. So now that we've introduced the concept, let's zoom in into some case studies. The first case study is from a chemical company that supplies a substance, a polymer, to the automotive industry. So what happens? The chemical company, they sell their substance to a molder. The molder, they sells their shapes into tier 1s or tier 2s, which makes the parts that go into vehicles. Those vehicles, they eventually get sold to consumers. But what the problem statement is that the chemical company, based on their sales pattern, they only have visibility or direct visibility to the sales of the molder. So they don't have visibility what happens further downstream in the value chain, what happens at tier 1s, at the vehicle manufacturers or the consumers. So they need to have some external data that can capture the behavior of those echelons. What we propose is to capture that behavior by using proxies, and those proxies, they capture they replicate the demand or the behavior of something that is very difficult to observe, what the downstream players are doing. And so we've listed some key proxies here for the automotive business. And so, for example, the tier 1's behavior can be replicated by looking at the industrial production for motor vehicle parts. The vehicle manufacturer's behavior can be captured by looking at the number of motor vehicle assemblies, and the behavior of the end consumer can be captured by looking at vehicle sales. So at that company, for their US business, we've built a forecast model using the total vehicle sales and other indicators. In that point in time, it was mid of 21, and there was a big event that was occurring in the automotive sector, and there was a huge semiconductor shortage that impacted the sales of most companies there. They were already talking about there is going to be an impact. Yes, no, they're not sure yet. And what you can see at the SREP line as the dark blue line, which is the sales outlook, and they were kind of expecting a small impact, but it was not going to take too long or be too impactful on the sales. But if we were looking at what the indicator model was saying at that time, it was a better replication of what the reality was going to be. We saw that in the vehicle sales, there had been a reduction of about 20%. So that effect was coming their way, and we were able to capture that downturn because of the semiconductor shortage with a 3-month leading value. And so what you can see in the vehicle sales is that the downturn there started during April 21, and for that company, the downturn started in July 21. And so by exploiting that leading value between the total vehicle sales and the sales of that company, we were able to capture that downturn months in advance. So related to that, and that is a kind of the output that you can expect when you're doing a leading indicator project, and it's in which you compare the different kind of outlooks. And so that can be the sales outlook, which was the case for that company, but it can also be the statistical outlook, the outlook made by the demand planning team, by marketing team, and so forth. And really, as I've mentioned before, it's not about looking at what forecasts is the right forecast. During the demand review meeting, it should really be about what are the underlying assumptions behind those outlooks. If we're in this specific case looking to the leading indicator outlook, it's mainly based on vehicle sales. So it can be a good predictor of how the markets will evolve. But if we look at the sales outlook, it's expecting a higher number, and it's not getting it right or wrong. But in the sales outlook, there's very different assumptions behind it. Maybe they're starting to sell a new application area for that chemical substance. Maybe they are winning a big client or a big project with a big car manufacturer. So in that case, it's good to look at the underlying assumptions. Why is there a deviation? Also, if you're comparing with the statistical outlook, it can also be a very interesting outlook, and because the statistical outlook just extrapolates the trend. So if there's a deviation between the statistical outlook and the leading indicator outlook, it might be that there will be some turbulence ahead in the market. Can be positive, can be negative, but it's good, and that's why we are really saying look at the underlying assumptions and each of the forecasts, and then make your consensus outlook based on the underlying assumptions of all your outlooks that you have underneath. Next, we also made some accuracy slides. I don't really like to talk too much about this because we often say it's not about getting the accuracy right. We expect the accuracy to be equally good or slightly better when times are stable. However, we're really seeing the big accuracy difference as what we can see here. When there's a lot of turbulence in the market, then if you can capture the trend right using leading indicator forecasting, you can really get very high accuracy improvements because it's very difficult to capture those turning points. Next, we also have some key stakeholder quotes that we've received from that client. I'd like to focus most on the one on the top left. And so by looking at the leading indicator outlook for that client, it really shifted the demand review meeting and the discussions there less from what's happening this month and next month to what's happening 3 to 6 months down the line. And so it's the focus became less on firefighting and more on actual tactical planning there. Also, the two comments on the right are, I think, very interesting. And the most important question of demand review becomes, do we know why the sales rep forecast is different? And the leading indicator forecasting pilot has allowed us not to look at our bottoms-up forecasts and build a story around it. It starts by comparing two forecasts and collecting arguments for one or the other. So it's not about which one is right, but what are the underlying assumptions for those outlooks, and where do we expect, based on those outlooks, we will end up in the upcoming months. The second case is in case of what happens in case of application growth, and some examples recently of application growth. If we look to the automotive sector, there has been a big shift to electrical vehicles. If you look to the broader industry, right now there's a big shift in renewable energy. If we're looking at historical application growth, and there was a big shift in the early 20th century, going from horse-drawn vehicles to ICE cars. Also, in the beginning of this century, there has been a big shift going from the old-fashioned telephone to mobile phones. And so all those are application growths. And in this case, we're looking at a company that is also active in the automotive, which the company is subject to the effect of the 4 automotive mega trends. And so they're listed there. Electrification is a very big one, going from ICE vehicles to electrical vehicles. Also digitalization, if you look to how cars have evolved over the past 20 years, there's an increasingly amount of digitalization and a number of chips going into cars. Also, a mega trend more for the future will be autonomous vehicles, and vehicles that will be that are able to drive onto their own. And the final trend is related to lightweight vehicles, spend or use less fuels. So that's also one of the mega trends in the automotive business. The company we're analyzing is subject to those trends, and what's very interesting is that over the past 10 years, sales of that company quadrupled, and so it went times 4, which is due to those automotive megatrends. So if we were to use only leading indicator forecasting by only looking, for example, at the automotive business cycle, we would not be able to capture that times 4 increase in the company's sales. However, if you look at how the yearly sales have evolved of that company, you can see that still the company is being impacted by the automotive business cycle. 2018 was a very good year for the automotive business, and as you can see, it showed above trend growth in that year. And then 2019 and 2020 were weaker for the automotive sector, and there you can see that it had below trend growth. And so if you're applying leading indicator forecasting, you need to split those effects. And so you will have the tactical effect, which is linked to automotive business cycle. Is it a good period for the automotive, or is there a recession in automotive? And next to that, you need to take into account the strategic growth of the mega trends, and that needs to be forecasted separately. So if we look at it concretely, so what we did for that company is on the tactical level, their automotive business cycle that we have predicted using leading indicators. So that's a model that is very similar to what you saw in case 1. Based on the automotive business cycle, you expect there to be a recession in automotive. Do you expect a good year in automotive? But next to that, you have the strategic effects related to the automotive megatrends. And there you need to take that into account by using scenarios. And so that's then scenarios where do you expect the EV adoption rate will be in the next year or the next 2 years? Where do you think the amount of substance of chemical polymer that's used in your car, how much do you think that will be used in the next year or the next 5 years? Also related to digitalization, how many chips per car could be, semiconductor chips, I mean, could be a very relevant strategic level scenario. So if you look then to the horizons, so typically then months and quarters in the future, that's the tactical forecasts horizon. That you need, that there you can still forecast your automotive business cycle, so that you can combine with the scenarios on the strategic horizon to forecast the tactical time frame. On the strategical time frame, it becomes very difficult to predict in 3, 4, 5 years whether the automotive business cycle will be in a boom or in a recession period. So there typically you only look at the scenarios linked to the mega trends. Then finally, the final case is linked to monitoring baskets. And so we've already discussed a typical automotive value chain where we've seen that, and there's the consumers, which are where the proxy is the total vehicle sales. And so in this graph, that's the blue line. Next, you have the the vehicle manufacturer, the OEM, whose behavior is captured by the proxy of the automotive vehicle assemblies. And then finally, you also have the tier one producers of the automotive. That's captured by the red line here, and the proxy called the industrial production of motor vehicle parts. Why do we include those indicators in a monitoring basket? Well, I refer again to case one. It's only you can only include a couple of indicators in a forecasting model. It's not recommended to include 10, 20 indicators into that forecast model. Otherwise, it will become a black box and you don't know anymore if there's a change occurring. Is it linked to indicator A, B, C, or D? It becomes very much obfuscated. So what you can see here is that before COVID, so COVID is denoted here by the gray area, you can see that automotive value chains were really quite well in sync. The blue line, the red line, and the green line, they exhibit very similar behavior from 2017 until 2020. Then COVID hit, and so all the indicators went down sharply during that period of time. Of course, there were some uncertainties on when recovery would be during the COVID outbreak. However, as you can see by looking at the blue line, the vehicle sales, the recovery went actually quite fast, and there was kind of a V-shaped recovery. It went down very quickly, but it got up again also very quickly. And even there was also a big pent up. So you can see near the start of 21, there has been an extremely high demand for vehicles, even higher than what we've seen in the years before COVID. So in that period in time, you can see that the demand for vehicles was a lot higher than the production. The production you can see at the green line. So the production during that period could not follow. That was a result of the semiconductor shortage. So in the end, if the demand is outrunning the supply, at a certain point in time, that has to stop, of course. And that's in the second period here, where you can see that the demand for those vehicles has been really low, actually, on a historical level. During that period, also, the supply of vehicles, so the assemblies and the production of parts has been lower. But then in the third period, near the start of 22, that finally managed to improve that semiconductor shortage. But then you can see we were in a totally different scenario where the demand was a lot lower than the supply of vehicles. And so only since the start of this year, the signals start to get more in sync. And it looks like the demand and the supply get more balanced. So this kind of monitoring baskets that will aid in decision making. You can see how the various echelons in the value chain are evolving. You can see how the demand is evolving, how the supply is evolving, and you can make educated decisions based on the evolution of those indicators. Now, how can you use those external data in your forecast process? That's where Gustavo will tell you more about.
Correct, and how we can make this happen together, right? Because we can work together with you in order to define these 5 to 6 main bullet points that we're having here that need to work cooperatively, because there's not something that's going to be just working with one specific requirement that we're going to be having, right? So to wrap up everything that we were mentioning before. So we need to have the right data reliability and the right talent associated to it, right? So as we pretty much know, every single time that we have all of these data issues, if we're having garbage in, we're going to be having garbage out, pretty much, right? So we need to have reliable data sources, reliable, like for example, people that will be having the expertise, like for example with Solventure and also with MIVAC, that will support you in order to have the proper analysis, the statistics related to it. Also too, that we will bring all of our market knowledge and the expertise to support you on having all of this full package for the first bullet point. The second one is, okay, we have the data, but we need to define the objectives, right? We need to define what is going to be the North Star for us in order to go into a specific goal, right? And we need to define also, together with those objectives, the specific KPIs that will measure and will be a reliable source for indicating if we're having success or not, right? So those first two, the data and the objectives, need to work operatively in the bullet point that we're having on the top right corner, right? Because we need to find those kind of relationships. So identifying those data points, metrics that will be aligned with those objectives, right? Because they need to be synchronized. We cannot just have data that will be totally misaligned with the objectives that we're going to be having, right? So having those leading indicators, understanding those ones, having predictive and prescriptive analytics to define those specific goals too, right? And we will be having probably operations and offering in terms of like machine learning, optimization of the processes, and so on and so on. Proper communication, as also I was mentioning at the beginning of the process, having a proper integrated business plan in order to have all of the organizational goals aligned, the resources also aligned, right? Because we can have the full process and the full goals established, but if we don't have the people and the capability to do it, then we're not going to be doing this properly, right? And the idea is to have like a long-term to mid-term kind of sustainable process and sustainable indicators that will be providing us competitive advantages that will be providing us the confidence to make sure that the forecasting process will be in place correctly, and that will be helping us to take the decisions in a better way. And the last one, IT and reporting, also pretty similar to what I was mentioning at the beginning of the conversation, is to have that IT infrastructure, also the proper reporting strategy, right? That again, we can have the proper data bases established, but we need to put it together into a certain way that those kind of key indicators will be speaking to us and will be providing valuable information where we can take some decisions associated to it, right? So having the proper discussions for understanding those leading indicators for sure will be giving us some advantages over the other companies that are not going to be doing this, right? Because we're going to be having better inputs for strategic planning, right? Improve the decision-making process. That we will be having tangible results and tangible inputs to take those kind of decisions too. Also, those decisions will be helping us to create a barrier or to be more reactive for having a better and improved risk management process, right? To react in certain ways and in certain kind of like fluctuations that, for example, we were having during the pandemic, right? This is also going to be giving us competitive advantage. We're going to be reacting quicker than the competitors too, if we implement this kind of solutions. But we also are going to be having a better kind of visibility in all of our forecasting processes. And this is going to be helping us to be more accurate, and we are going to be solving all of the challenges that we were describing at the beginning of the conversation. And for sure, at the end of the day, I guess the idea is to keep having and keep evolving, having continuous improvement, relying on the information that we're going to be having from the industry, but also moving away from just thinking that we need to pay attention to just our industry. For example, macroeconomic data challenges that we're having, but that we need to have like a broader kind of picture, looking into what is happening in other aspects, like for example, geopolitics, consumer behavior that we were describing too, any other things that are happening for other industries that could be impacting our industry, right? That we don't look at it from a silo perspective, and all of the political kind of situation that also we are facing nowadays, right? So all of those kind of things together, we need to put them into a blender to find the optimal solution for all of us, right? So I guess this was describing pretty much what are the kind of strategies, the kind of like benefits that you can obtain if we can support you together with Solventure into all of the processes that you can have and the challenges that you're having inside of the companies that you're working for. And I guess together with Jillian and also the Solventure team, we're going to be more than happy to have separate conversations probably after this webinar to discuss more about this, to feel the pain points that you guys are having, because that's also something important that we need to understand too. All right. I will give it back to you. Okay?
All right, great. Thanks a lot, Gustavo. So that's indeed what we have prepared for today. There's still some time left, so we have a couple of minutes left for questions. If there's any questions, do not hesitate to reach out via the chat or via the Q&A here in Zoom. I'd like to already thank you for your attention during the webinar. I'd also like to thank Gustavo for joining us during this webinar. So thank you, Gustavo, also. I see that already one question has flown into the chat here. So the question is, when feeding this input into a model, do you remove a period like recession and treat it like an outlier, or do you incorporate it into the model? A good question. That kind of depends on the type of the outlier. And if we're looking to, let's say, the COVID recession or the COVID lockdowns, there was not really a leading indicator for COVID lockdown. It's not that there were like indicators that could say, okay, you could see it coming months in advance. So in that sense, you will need to filter it out or take it into account into your model. If it's more linked to a recession period, reduced sales due to normal or healthy economic behavior, like a recession, then typically that's already captured in leading indicators. And so you could see, for example, if we're looking at the situation with the semiconductor shortage that we've shown in the slides, you can see a couple of months in advance that there is a downturn on the horizon. And so in that sense, it kind of depends on the outlier. Hope that answered the question.
Yeah, and I guess it will also depend on the, I mean, for example, as you were mentioning, Gillian, the pandemic, it was not something that's going to be happening every year, but at least it will be helping you to create what we were describing, this kind of resilient network that at some point we need to establish those kind of like strategies or parameters to define, okay, if it happens again, how we need to react to that, right? That we need to be ready for those kind of situations that probably not, are not going to be happening every year, but at least that at some point, if they happen, we need to have our network or our business flexible enough to go ahead and face those kind of situations, right? But those kind of like situations, probably, as Julian was mentioning, we need to decide if we need to incorporate it fully or not, or if we just treat it as a specific parameter for risk management purposes. Okay. Any other question? All right. Well, thank you, Gillian, for the invitation.
Yes, so if there's any more questions, do not hesitate to reach out. We will follow up on your questions after the webinar. So thank you again, Gustavo, for joining us. And thank you for taking the time to follow the webinar. And we hope to see you again in the next Solventure or a next MIBAG webinar. So thank you and have a good day.